Navigate the complex grid of modern society, where every choice leads to a brand new and unpredictable destination. We bring you the thrill of the chase and the wisdom of the journey in high contrast. Hit subscribe now and join the race toward the ultimate truth. My father-in-law's birthday dinner was supposed to be a celebration. 50 guests. A rented private room at Hargrove's. The kind of restaurant where the menu has no prices, and the waitstaff refills your water before you notice it's low. My mother-in-law had been planning it for 3 months. Linen napkins, a string quartet in the corner, the whole thing. And right there, in front of every single person at that table, my father looked across at me and said, "So, still playing house with that handyman?" I kept my hands in my lap. I didn't answer. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I work as a middle school art teacher in a suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. I have been with my boyfriend, Marcus, for 2 years. He is the kindest, most quietly certain person I have ever met. He drives a beat-up Ford F-150, keeps sawdust on his jeans more often than not, and once spent an entire Saturday helping my elderly neighbor rehang a gate she'd been asking her own son to fix for 6 months. My family is not like Marcus. My father is a federal judge. My mother ran a successful appellate law firm for 22 years before she semi-retired to serve on nonprofit boards and attend charity galas. My older brother, Philip, is a cardiovascular surgeon. My younger brother, Derek, just made partner at a consulting firm in Chicago at 29. At family dinners, the conversation moves like a current case outcomes, hospital rankings, quarterly earnings, who got appointed where. I stopped trying to swim against it years ago. I mostly float. I became a teacher because I love it. I knew when I was 19, sitting in an art history class, watching a professor show a slide of Edward Hopper's Nighthawks, and seeing 3 students in the front row lean forward at the exact same moment. I knew that was what I wanted to do. Create that moment. Over and over. With 12-year-olds who still think art is just drawing. My family has never said outright that they're disappointed in me. They don't have to. It lives in the pauses. In the way my mother changes the subject when someone asks what I do. In the way my father introduces my brothers at parties, my son the surgeon, my son the partner, and then gets to me with, "And Claire teaches." Not Claire is a teacher. Just Claire teaches. Like it's a phase. Like any day now, I'll come to my senses and go to law school. Marcus fit right into the pause. I met him at a farmer's market on a Saturday morning in October. I wasn't even there to shop. Really, I was killing time before a friend's brunch, and I wandered into the market the way you wander into any open door when the weather is good. He had a booth. He was selling custom-built wooden furniture, small pieces, a few cutting boards, 2 side tables, a rocking chair that I stopped in front of and couldn't explain why. He looked up. He had dark eyes and a calm about him that I noticed immediately, the way you notice silence after a long noise. "You can sit in it," he said. "People always want to, but nobody asks." I sat in it. We talked for 40 minutes. I missed brunch entirely. On our 3rd date, I asked him what he did. He said he worked with wood restoration, custom builds, some structural repair. He told me he'd started doing it in his mid-20s, that he'd fallen into it from a different path and found he couldn't leave. He said it with a straightforwardness that I found unusual. Most people apologize for their careers in some small way. He didn't. I didn't push for more. It felt like enough. I was used to people defining themselves by their credentials, and here was someone who just told me what he loved to do. It felt honest in a way I wasn't used to. My family met Marcus for the first time at Christmas, 8 months into our relationship. My mother made a remark within the first hour, not cruel, not even intentional, the way the worst ones never are, about how lovely it was that a tradesman could be so well read. Marcus thanked her. I watched his jaw tighten for exactly 1 second and then release. My father waited until Marcus left the room, and then said to me, quietly, "He seems like a good man, just not your kind of good." I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't. Over the following months, I watched my family construct a version of Marcus in their minds friendly enough, decent enough, but fundamentally a placeholder. Someone I was with because I hadn't figured out what I really wanted yet. My mother occasionally sent me listings for graduate programs. My father mentioned a friend's son who'd just been appointed to the state bench. Derek once asked Marcus, with what I think was genuine curiosity and no awareness of how it landed, "So is this like a career thing for you, or more of a lifestyle?" Marcus answered every single one of them, without anger. He was patient in a way that sometimes made me feel like I was the one losing my mind. The birthday dinner was in April. My father-in-law, I should clarify, my mother's father, my grandfather, was turning 70. My mother had organized everything. The guest list was heavy with my father's colleagues from the federal judiciary, my mother's board connections, Philip's chief of surgery, Derek's managing partners from Chicago. The kind of gathering where everyone at the table has a title that precedes their name and the conversation is really just a series of negotiations dressed as small talk. Marcus wore a blazer. His hands were clean. He pulled out my chair before I sat down, and the woman next to me, a federal prosecutor named Linda, who'd known my father for 15 years, leaned over and said to me, "He's lovely." I felt something loosen in my chest. Then dinner started. It was fine at first. The soup course came and went. The conversation moved around the table like it always did, my father speaking at length about an upcoming case, Philip describing a surgical technique to someone who clearly didn't understand it, but nodded anyway, Derek making the whole table laugh with a story about a client. Marcus talked to Linda about a restoration project he'd done on an old Victorian in the short north. She was genuinely interested. I watched her ask follow-up questions. And then my father clinked his glass. He stood up to give a toast for my grandfather's birthday. It was a good toast, actually warm, specific, a memory from when my father was a teenager that made my grandfather tear up a little. The table applauded. And then my father looked down at his glass, and then up, and his eyes moved around the table and landed on me. He said, "It's nights like this that remind me how proud I am of this family. Philip is doing extraordinary things in the OR. Derek just closed the biggest deal of his career." He paused. He smiled. "And Claire as well. Claire is still Claire." A few people laughed. Politely. The way people laugh when they're not sure if something is a joke. I felt my face go very still. My father sat down. And then, as if he'd just thought of something, he looked across the table at Marcus and said, "You know, we never did hear. Is the handyman business treating you well? Good to have a trade, I suppose." Steady work. It wasn't a question. It was the period at the end of a sentence he'd been writing about Marcus for a year. Marcus looked at my father for a moment. He smiled, very slightly. He said, "It's good work. I'm grateful for it." My father nodded like that, confirmed something. He turned away. Under the table, Marcus found my hand. He held it once, firm, and let go. I stared at my plate. The woman next to me, Linda, had gone quiet. I could feel the shape of the table shift, not dramatically, just a small recalibration. The kind that happens when something has been said that can't quite be unsaid. And then, from the far end of the table, a man I didn't know very well stood up. His name was Gerald Whitmore. He was a friend of my grandfather's. They'd gone to college together, lost touch, reconnected in their 60s. He was in his early 70s, silver-haired, with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need announcing. He'd been mostly silent all evening. I'd barely registered him. He was looking at Marcus. He said, "I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I have to ask." He tilted his head. "Marcus Hale?" The table went still. Marcus turned toward him. Something changed in Marcus's posture, not tense, just attentive. He said, "Yes, sir." Gerald Whitmore set down his fork. He said, "You designed the reading rooms." There was a silence that lasted about 3 seconds. It felt much longer. Marcus said, "I did." Gerald looked around the table. His voice was easy, conversational, like he was describing something he'd seen in a magazine. He said, "This young man built the Hale reading rooms. 14 of them now, I believe. In under-resourced middle schools across Ohio and Kentucky." He looked back at Marcus. The one in Zanesville had a wait list of donors before the walls were finished. I try these befound days before the debt, before the fording before Dane. Befording that my foundation, before the calming running agenda. He smiled. That you weren't taking outside funding because you didn't want the program attached to anyone's branding agenda. I respected that enormously. My father had gone very quiet. My mother's hand had stopped moving toward her wine glass. Gerald kept going. He said, I also saw the piece in the Times architecture section. The Methodist Church in Lexington, the restoration. They said you turned down the AIA award. Marcus said, I turned down the dinner. They kept the award somewhere, I think. Gerald laughed. It was a real laugh. Someone at the table said, quietly, the Hale Reading Rooms. That's a national program. I read about that. My father said nothing. Gerald sat back down. He picked up his fork. He said, to no one in particular, 14 schools. I think the count may actually be 17 by now. He looked at Marcus. Are you still building them yourself? Marcus said, some of them. I have a team now. But I still do the finish work. That's why they're so beautiful, Gerald said simply. The table moved on. Someone changed the subject. The string quartet played something low and unhurried in the corner. But I watched my father for the rest of the night. He didn't make another joke. He didn't say Marcus's name again. At one point, near the end of dessert, he looked at me from across the table with an expression I hadn't seen from him before. Not remorse exactly, but something adjacent to it. Like a man who has said something confident in a room full of people, and then realized, too late, that he was wrong. My mother found me by the coat check on the way out. She said, Claire. Just that. I said, Mom. She said, I didn't know. I said, I know you didn't. She started to say something else, and then stopped. She kissed me on the cheek and got her coat. In the car on the way home, Marcus drove and didn't say anything for a while. The highway was quiet. It was late April and the windows were cracked and the air smelled like rain that hadn't come yet. I said, Why didn't you ever tell me? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I told you I worked with wood. I told you I restored things and built things. That's true. You know what I mean. He looked at the road. He said, When I met you, you looked at me like I was just a person. I hadn't had that in a while. I wasn't ready to give it up. I didn't know what to say to that. I looked out the window at the dark fields going by. He said, The rooms aren't about me. They started because my younger sister had a school with no library and nowhere quiet to read. That's all it was. It grew and I let it grow, but I didn't want it to be a credential. I didn't want it to be something I handed to people when they looked at my truck and made a decision. I said, My father made a decision. He said, He did. I said, I'm sorry. He said, Don't be. He's your father. I'm not interested in punishing him for it. That was what Marcus said. He was not interested in punishing my father. I thought about that for a long time. The weeks after the dinner were strange. My father called me on a Tuesday afternoon, 4 days later. He started with the weather, which he never does. Then he said, I think I was rude to your young man. I said, His name is Marcus, Dad. A pause. I think I was rude to Marcus. I said, You've been rude to Marcus for a year. Another pause. Longer. He said, I know that. It was the closest thing to an apology I had heard from my father in 31 years. It wasn't enough, and we both knew it. But it was something. My mother called separately. Her call was different. She asked questions. Real ones. About the reading rooms, about how Marcus had started, about how long I'd known and hadn't told them. I said I hadn't told them, because the first time they met him, they decided who he was, and I knew it wouldn't matter. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, That's fair. Those 2 words from my mother meant more than I knew how to say. Philip texted me. Looked him up. He's legit. Sorry the fam was weird. That was Philip's version of a reckoning, and I decided to accept it. Derek called and tried to make a joke, and I let the call go to voicemail. I wasn't ready for Derek yet. The harder thing, the thing I kept turning over, was what I was going to do with the anger I still had. Not toward Marcus, not toward the situation, toward the fact that my family had needed a reason to respect him, that the reading rooms had to exist, that Gerald Whitmore had to stand up, that without that moment, my father would have gone on saying you're handyman for years and thought nothing of it. I said that to Marcus. A few weeks later. We were at his workshop, a large converted garage outside of town where he does most of his building. It smelled like cedar and linseed oil, and something I couldn't name, but had come to associate entirely with him. He was sanding the edge of a table, and he didn't stop when I started talking. He listened. When I finished, he set down the sandpaper. He said, "You're right. They needed a reason. That's worth being angry about." He looked at me. And also people grow. Sometimes they need a catalyst, and sometimes that's embarrassing for them, and sometimes it's not enough. You get to decide what you do with it. I said, "You're very calm about this." He said, "I'm not always. I'm calm about this today." I said, "Do you want to keep going? With my family the way they are?" He looked at me for a long moment. He said, "I want to keep going with you. Your family comes with that." I knew that when I drove to that restaurant. I have thought about that answer many times since then. The plainness of it. I want to keep going with you. My grandfather's birthday dinner was 5 months ago. Things are different now, though not entirely fixed. Fixed implies it was a single thing that broke, and it wasn't. It was a pattern, long and slow, and patterns take time to change. My father has met Marcus 3 more times since the dinner. He asks him real questions now. He's still stiff, still a little formal in the way. Men who are wrong and know it sometimes become formal like manners, are a way of paying a debt. But he's trying. I can see it. My mother visited the reading room in a school 20 miles from Columbus on a Thursday in July. She didn't tell me she was going. She texted me a photo afterward. A long, narrow room with warm wood shelves that reached the ceiling, and a window seat along one wall. Kids scattered in chairs reading. The caption said, "Now I understand." I cried a little. I didn't tell her that. Marcus and I are still together. We are very much still together. He started on the 18th reading room, this one in a school in eastern Tennessee. I drove down with him last month to see the site, an old storage room that the principal had been fighting to reclaim for 3 years. Marcus walked the space with the kind of quiet attention he brings to everything, measuring, marking, already seeing something that wasn't there yet. The principal was a woman in her late 50s, who'd been at the school for over 2 decades. She shook Marcus's hand and said, "I've been trying to get someone to help us with this for years. We can't pay much." Marcus said, "I know. That's why I'm here." I stood in the doorway of that empty room and watched him walk it, and I thought about what my father had said at that dinner. Good to have a trade, I suppose. I thought about the rocking chair at the farmer's market, the 40 minutes I'd stood there talking to a stranger and missed my friend's brunch and never once regretted it. I thought about what it means to make something with your hands that lasts. Something a child sits in, or reads under, or carries into a memory they'll have for the rest of their life. There's a kind of work that doesn't show up well on a resume, that doesn't come with a title or a dinner or a ceremony most of the time. My family spent years believing that work was less serious, less worthy, less real. I don't think they believe that anymore. I'm not sure my father has fully untangled it, the thing he was taught about what success looks like. It was hammered into him the way those things get hammered into people, and I've had to find some compassion for that even when I didn't want to. But here's what I know. The room in Tennessee is going to be finished by November. There will be a window seat. There will be warm wood shelves that reach the ceiling. And some kid in eastern Tennessee is going to walk in there one afternoon after school and find a quiet place and open a book and not know the name of the person who built it for them. That's the work. That's who Marcus is. And I would choose him again every single time.